Last time we talked about the choices you have to make when you've settled on making an app. This time we're going to talk about the parallel path. What are your options when you've settled on making a website? The big choice to me is between adaptive and responsive design. There are some false choices, but I'll talk about those later. Responsive is the word you probably hear the most. It's buzzy, but not necessarily the best choice. Responsive web design is a subset of adaptive design, which is a larger set of principles and practices to make the presentation of your digital content, any digital content, and maybe any content at all, not just the web, work well for the user's device, medium, context, and needs. I like to be super duper clear on this terminology. Responsive is just scaling or moving things around the layout based on the pixel size of the display screen. From the UX point of view alone, that should be suspect. There's a lot more to things than the UI. And indeed, there's a lot more we can modify based on device capabilities and the user's known or implied context, based on their device and other information we know about them. Adaptive covers the rest of it. You can adapt everything. Content strategy is a good one, and where everyone from TV Guide to NPR has made their living. You don't just post an article in different sizes, but post different content based on the device. If your site lives by clicks and readers, and it does, then the improved rates for making right-sized titles alone is worth the extra effort. I hope things like changing the interface and interaction based on touch is obvious. Not because it's a smartphone or not, but with feature detection, you can determine the individual device has touch. Touchscreen laptops are here, and more all the time, so assuming Windows equals mouse is no longer possible. I have one of these Windows tablets, and there's a serious problem to using it as an actual tablet. It is good to know where things come from. Responsive design is just a term invented semi-recently by Ethan Marcotte to encompass some current trends. It reminded me right away of fluid design from a few years back. But then I cast my mind back further and remember thinking the same thing in that era, when CSS Zen Garden became big, that this was cool stuff, but not conceptually different from what we'd been doing for years. We did percentage tables, and frame sets, God help us, from around 1997 in ways that are very, very similar to what is going today with multi-screen design. As soon as CSS came around, we scaled type and used background images in weird ways to account for multiple screen sizes. We hacked the system with image replacement principles. Guys who worked for me contributed slightly to SIFR. Hell, I applied for a patent on a funny button made of tables and styles so we could feed it from data stores, and it would resize depending on the content and interface. Not granted, but we used stuff like this for years. Enough reminiscing, though. It's important to know this has been around forever because things like the device detection are not new. Luca Pisani noticed that what we now call fragmentation in the 1990s. Yes, on feature phones. Wurfel, which is the only device detection tool you need, started way back then and just happens to address the same issues we have today. There are other DDRs, but in the last few years, Wurfel is one. If you dig down to the included device detection with, say, Adobe CQ or Wikimedia or the WordPress WP Touch plugin, it's Wurfel. So while I know Luca personally, don't worry, I don't get money for plugging his product. You do have to get software installed, but it's free and pretty well supported, so no tricks. Corporate and need guarantees it works? Buy a service contract, as they'll sell you that also. The biggest deal is changing or taking advantage of dynamic content adaptation on your side. Use your CMS to full capability and componentize your design. Think in features and widgets, not pages, to adapt the UI to the situation. You don't have to install a device detection repository in your server to be adaptive. You can do it by loading elements based on client-side detection. There are some neat things emerging now, like a version of Wurfel that works via JavaScript, and some image resizers that allow you to avoid simply squishing giant images. Modernizer is a great case and a great tool. It's a JavaScript feature detection library. Features are things like whether the device supports touch. With responsive, you set breakpoints, decide that anything under, say, 640 pixels is a phone and therefore touch, and therefore gets this optimized for touch layout. But Modernizer lets you directly detect the presence of touch. So you can do things like modify the desktop layout when you detect it's a touch-sensitive device, or modify the phone layout when you detect it's a non-touch smartphone. You just double the number of people who can effectively get to your website. Client-side solutions have downsides, but can be a great first step as you move your flat old desktop website towards the adaptive world. This is much more often encountered as a derisive term for the responsive design fanboys. Much like everything not agile is waterfall, truly separate mobile sites barely exist in the real world, because it's never totally separate. If you're the same company, if you're feeding from the same content repository, that's adaptive at some level. Often when shown the separate site solution by a client, it's simply not true, but is a device detection loading scheme just using a very different mobile template. That's just adaptive. Now, it may be badly adaptive. It might use the default mobile template for, say, WordPress, but just fix that in design. These do sort of exist, and that's when someone makes an MDOT site. Even today, this happens, and it's kind of bad. I follow a tweet someone posted from their phone to an awesome article on The Atlantic, and it's the mobile site. But Twitter is cross-platform. I'm reading it on my computer, and it looks all broken. Odd enough, it's hard to read. Adaptive isn't like that, but loads the proper content every time, no matter how you access the site. As much as I say responsive is a subset of adaptive, and it is, they end up being sold as two separate approaches. So to boil it down, responsive is talked about a lot, but adaptive is enterprise grade and makes money. Responsive is buzzy and easy to demonstrate, but it's hard to scale and maintain. It has huge performance issues, and I mean it's causing the average page size of the entire internet to go up markedly. Adaptive, on the other hand, drives business. 82% of the top 100 sites are using device detection and loading different sites or changing out features based on capabilities. Little places like Amazon. The downsides are increased initial investment and having to get the server guys to play nice with the web devs. But it's much higher performing and is designed for maintenance. If you haven't picked up on it already, I say this isn't quite an either-or. It's a continuum, like everything, and an evolution. Use the features you can get in place. Plan for better over time as you have the budget. Don't leave one behind for another, but build and improve. One thing I remind people of a lot is not to replace responsive with adaptive. You still want each of the adaptive templates to be responsive itself. The size of mobiles, much less any other thing else, varies a lot, so responding to scale is still very valuable, not just a nice to have. And remember, mobile users get accustomed to the way their devices work. Poor or inconsistent use of browser or OS features makes the interaction terrible. Let's look at an example of an adaptive design. Epicurious has an entirely different look for their mobile experience, changing the way that they offer advertising, arranging the navigation, and prioritizing search. Their homepage here adapts content, not just what is presented, but the images and words they use to present it. The big tagline on "Update your roast chicken" is simply gone, and also made more readable by pulling it out from the image to stand on its own. And that isn't just for homepages. Amazon is a good example you probably use a lot. Their mobile site, to use the false separate site terminology, is optimized for showrooming. You're going to refer to it wherever you are, maybe in a store, to compare prices and buy from them instead. It simplifies the site, but not really. It just reduces the content and choices you first see: an image, the title, the rating, the price. They recognize the content area is more important than the navigation, so most of it is in the footer. Every bit of information about the product and every navigational link is still available if you scroll. Adaptation really shines for the end user in using device features. Weather.com on the desktop has a homepage: news, videos, info. A little weather box that shows me weather in a random carousel of cities. Munich? Well, I've been there, but I'm in Kansas now, so they aren't even risking IP location apparently. If I customize it, cookies remember me, but that places the burden on the user. On mobile, it uses the location service to focus on what you want anyway, but especially need when on a mobile: your weather, where you are now. Scrolling down, again, if you see the pattern, gives you the rest of the homepage content, but the first thing you see is content adapted to you, where you are and what you're doing now. It even passes this information to their advertising, giving more customized information and giving them more revenue. What you've seen, I hope, is that adapting your content is about changing what exists. No matter how much we progress, the Web 1.0 world keeps us down. If your product owner puts a feature into the requirements document, the most likely result of this without any design intervention is a page or dialogue providing that feature. This is, I think, where the separate site terminology comes from so much. Any change past reflowing from 3 columns to 2 feels to a lot of people like it needs to be a different page. That's not how adaptive design should work. Change widgets, components, and content. Arrange your whole product development program to understand that, from conception to test to DevOps. In the next part, I'll talk about designing that system, not just the website or app, but your service from the user's point of view.